Welcome to the Explainer. So if you're a systems engineer or an IT admin, you already know the deal. The one thing making Windows Hello for Business actually more secure than your standard run-of-the-mill password? It all comes down to one tiny little chip on the motherboard, the Trusted Platform Module, or TPM. But today, we're not just doing a basic overview. We're treating this explainer like a full-blown forensic investigation. We're going to uncover exactly why Windows Hello deployments sometimes silently fail on your endpoints, and why, on the flip side, they sometimes loudly lock out your users completely. So grab your detective hats, because we are digging deep into the hardware. All right, let's dive into our runbook for today. First up, the Hello TPM problem. Then, we'll look at how Hello actually uses the TPM, followed by diagnosing your TPM state. After that, we'll talk about enforcing hardware requirements, and finally, we'll wrap up with the firmware update track. Okay, Section 1, the Hello TPM problem, anatomy of a failure. When we start looking at endpoint security issues involving Windows Hello, we usually stumble upon two very distinct types of failures that send admins running to the forums. It's actually fascinating how completely opposite these two symptoms are, especially since they stem from the exact same chip. So on one hand, you've got the silent danger. This happens when a device has no usable TPM at all. And because nobody actually enforced a hardware policy, Windows Hello just goes ahead and provisions a credential in software. The catch? That ironclad, unexportable key security guarantee? Yeah, it simply isn't there. It is a massive blind spot. On the other hand, though, you have the loud problem. This is when a user literally cannot enter their PIN, or Windows Hello is just constantly throwing errors at them, all because the TPM has tripped into a complete hardware lockout. Moving on to Section 2, how Hello uses TPM, the suspect. Let's interrogate our prime suspect here, the Trusted Platform Module itself, and see exactly how it mechanically behaves during that provisioning process. To really grasp the failures, you have to understand the mechanics underneath, and it all revolves around this concept called the TPM seal. See, when a user sets up Hello, their protector key, which is tied to their PIN or biometric gesture, performs this TPM seal operation. It uses that physical gesture as entropy. Basically, this means the unexportable private key can only be released on this specific hardware by this specific user. This right here, this is what provides that vital anti-replay property. If an attacker somehow steals the on-disk data and tries to move it to another machine, well, it's completely useless. Why? Because the original sealing TPM just isn't there to unlock it. So the absolute crucial point here is this massive hidden vulnerability that's just sitting there in the default settings. If a device lacks a usable TPM, Windows Hello defaults to generating and encrypting the key in software just to keep things working. The default is literally prefer TPM except software, meaning without strict policies explicitly telling the system to require a TPM, Windows Hello just happily generates these vulnerable software keys. And honestly, the scariest part, you would probably never even know just by looking at your management portal. Real quick before we move on to diagnosing things, a quick word on older hardware. Now, while Windows Hello technically supports both TPM 1.2 and 2.0, TPM 1.2 only allows RSA and SHA-1. Plus, it has these wildly inconsistent lockout behaviors depending on who manufactured it. Microsoft actually explicitly recommends excluding TPM 1.2. Trust me, you are much, much better off deliberately letting those ancient devices just fall out of scope rather than inviting a massive support nightmare into your fleet. Do yourself a favor and require TPM 2.0. All right. Section 3, diagnosing your TPM state, the evidence. We know the crime, we know the suspect. Now, how do we actually look at the diagnostic evidence on a live endpoint? Well, we do it using the PowerShell command get-tpm. When you run get-tpm, you're going to get a ton of information back, but there are really only 3 fields that actually matter for a locked out user. First up is locked out. If this reads true, it means the TPM has seen way too many failed authorization attempts and completely throttled itself. Every single Hello sign-in is blocked right at the hardware level. Next is lockout count. Think of this as just a running tally of failed PIN attempts recorded so far. Once that number hits the TPM's built-in threshold, boom, that locked out field flips to true. And finally, lockout heal time. This tells you the exact number of minutes until the TPM's own internal cooldown kicks in, self-heals, and finally lifts the lockout. And this brilliantly illustrates what I like to call the do not touch rule. The fix for a lockout is almost always to just wait for that lockout heal time to expire. Seriously, do not smash the reset button. Clearing or resetting a TPM is an absolute last resort, not your first troubleshooting step. Why? Because resetting it permanently destroys all sealed keys on that device. It will literally force a total reprovisioning of Windows Hello for every single user on that machine. Just grab a coffee and wait it out. Which brings us to Section 4, Enforcing Hardware Requirements, Law and Order. Now that we've decoded all the evidence, it is time to establish some law and order by officially closing that dangerous software fallback loophole. If you're managing your fleet with Intune, here are the exact, actionable steps to enforce this. First, pop into the Intune Admin Center, navigate over to Devices, and create a new policy using the Settings catalog for Windows 10 and later. Second, search the Settings picker for Windows Hello for Business and check Require Security Device. Finally, set that value to True. Oh, and please assign this to a pilot group first, not all devices, just so you can test it safely. Now, for those of you running traditional on-prem infrastructure, we've got parallel steps using group policy to ensure no machine slips through the cracks. Open up your Group Policy Management console and edit your target GPO. You're going to navigate down through Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and into Windows Hello for Business. Find the policy named Use a Hardware Security Device and simply set it to Enabled. Of course, whether you use Intune or Group Policy, it all writes down to the exact same place in the registry. You can actually verify the policy landed correctly by checking the registry path for the Require Security Device D word. If it equals 1, that means a TPM is strictly required and that sneaky software fallback is successfully blocked. But hold on, before you go enforcing this fleet-wide, you absolutely must do a pre-flight audit. Remember, requiring a security device means endpoints without a working TPM 2.0 will simply not provision Hello at all. They are going to be stuck on passwords. You really need to run an audit across your fleet checking for TPM present false before you flip that switch. If you skip this, you might accidentally knock a huge chunk of your older fleet off Windows Hello entirely. Talk about a massive Monday morning help desk spike, right? Okay, Section 5, the firmware update trap, the plot twist. Let's see how all this builds to the hidden traps waiting for you in consumer hardware and firmware. So here's the thing. Many business laptops today don't actually have a dedicated physical TPM chip. Instead, they use firmware TPMs baked right into the CPU, like Intel's PTT or AMD's FTPM. Now, while these are totally legitimate TPM 2.0 implementations, they definitely have their quirks. For example, some AMD FTPM versions were causing system stuttering a while back. The firmware update to fix that stutter? Well, it can actually clear the FTPM if you aren't super careful. In fact, a routine BIOS update or even a user just messing with a clear TPM toggle in their BIOS acts as a completely silent TPM clearing event. It instantly invalidates every sealed key on the box. So if Windows Hello suddenly breaks for every user on a device right after a firmware update, it's actually not a bug. The FTPM was cleared, the credentials are gone, and your users just have to reprovision. The TPM seal is actually working exactly as designed because it no longer recognizes the TPM as the original hardware. To help you navigate all this safely without losing your mind, there are some fantastic proactive remediation scripts available on GitHub, specifically designed for Intune. You've got a read-only health check script to see if a key is hardware or software-backed. You have a detection script that flags TPM lockouts and unenforced policies fleet-wide. And, maybe best of all, there's a paired remediation script that is strictly report-only. It safely logs its findings to a CSV and your event log without automatically changing settings or blindly clearing TPMs, which, as we just established, is super dangerous. These are absolutely incredible tools for that pre-flight audit we talked about. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. Go back to your desk, pull up your Endpoint management portal, and ask yourself honestly, is your fleet's Windows Hello hardware backed by strict policy, or are you just operating on luck right now? The tools to enforce and audit this are literally right at your fingertips. Please don't let your security rely on the default settings. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy investigating.